Hello everyone, it's Dr. Wolf here, and in this video I wanted to give you some feedback on your homework, which was evaluating the article that we read yesterday, Our Global Food System is the Primary Driver of Biodiversity Loss. Alright, so let's get into it. Let's first look at the relevancy. Alright, if we go back to the article, this article is from 2021. So I could say this article is from 2021. That's what I see. That's what's in blue. The red is my assessment, my evaluation. New information frequently comes out on climate change, but this article is still relevant. It's within 1 or 2 years. All right. Now, if you look at this right here, this is just a screenshot from my website. So if you're ever like, relevancy, Dr. Wolf, I'm not sure about that, we could go to the evaluating information page of the website under scientific practices. And then right here, determine if the source is relevant, some helpful information to help us out. So now let's go on to determine the credibility of the source. And again, we could always reference this information right here if we needed that help. So if I go back here, specifically, I want to just look at the evidence. This article is a summary of a report. And at the very beginning of the article, the full link is given, right? So right here, go down, click on this link, food systems impact biodiversity loss, and if I click on one more link right here, the full report, I get the full report. Come on, load. All right, so 75 pages where it goes into detail. If I wanted to, I could read this whole thing, right, just to say like, oh yeah, it matches up with what the author said, right? But the fact that they offer that information gives it some credibility. And again, I don't have to go back and read a whole 75-page report every time, but it's nice that is there just in case I wanted to reference something. So in the red, this is how I'm evaluating. This direct link to the actual report, this adds to its credibility. All right, so if we continue on, not just looking at the evidence, but doing some lateral reading. All right, so if we search biodiversity and farming, we might get results like this. So biodiversity and farming. All right, or let's actually do biodiversity and climate change. Oh yeah, biodiversity and farming. All right, and we see the importance of biodiversity and wildlife on farmland. All right, that's from businesswales.gov. Okay, so a .gov site. Farm biodiversity, a healthier ecosystem farmed together. All right, so we're seeing similar claims, similar articles about the subject matter. Again, this doesn't guarantee that it's credible, but it definitely adds to it, right? So I searched biodiversity and farming and found many articles from seemingly credible websites that also claim the same thing. This adds to the credibility of the website. All right, so now let's look at authority. Let's look at 2 examples. All right, so this website, the website that published the article is the UN Environment Program. So maybe off the bat you hear the word UN and you're like, I know that organization. But just in case, you're like, UN Environment Program. Searching it, and let's go to Wikipedia. By the way, Wikipedia could be a fine source. It could be a fine source, especially when doing some lateral reading. All right, so the United Nations Environmental Program is responsible for coordinating responses to environmental issues within the United Nations system. All right, so hopefully a lot of you have heard of the United Nations. Really, really, really credible organization, right? So if I go back here, all right, the United Nations is a highly credible organization, all right, so that adds to its authority. Now, one thing, I don't know if you noticed, if you go to this article, here's the date, looking through it, I'm not seeing an author. Interesting. So no author. So this is what I said about that. The author's name in the article, it's not given, which this might make me suspicious. I want to know like who's behind this, right? However, this article is posted on the United Nations website. So sometimes websites like that, like a .gov, won't always have an author towards it. All right, again, that does actually kind of notch down the credibility a little bit, but I also have to know that, okay, this might happen sometimes. But here's what does add some credibility. If I continue to scroll down, right here, for more information, please contact these people and their titles. So it's being very transparent and saying like, hey, if you want to know more about this, you could track us down. So that does add a little bit more credibility, all right? So the article does give 3 people names to contact with questions, which reassures my credibility of this article. All right. So lastly, let's look at bias. All right. The article is by the UN Environmental Program, which, from looking at Wikipedia, coordinates the response to environmental issues. The United Nations has a very credible reputation. All right. So because of that, I'm going to say, okay, it may not have as much bias. Because it's reputable, it's going to be a little bit more objective. However, because this is the environmental program, it still might have some environmental bias, right? And by the way, like, that's okay. We just need to recognize, all right, I think this is a really well written article. I agree personally, Dr. Wolf, with a lot of what they're saying, but I also know that they're coming from a certain perspective. I just have to keep that in mind. All right, so hopefully this feedback is helpful. But before you go, I want to show you guys something. All right, on the website, if we scroll down here and go to identify bias, right? We talked about this yesterday, this ad. Interesting. It was by beverage companies instead of the EPA. If you read an article and you're like, oh, it's from this source, right? Let's say it's from CNN or the Wall Street Journal or Pod Save America, whatever it is, you might be like, well, is that a credible source, right? I'm not as familiar with these things, Dr. Wolf, or I don't know which way they lean politically, all right? That's okay. You will get the hang of these things as you just engage in the world and information. However, to help you out, there's two charts that I have here on my website. All sides media bias chart. So here's center, and this is how they differ politically. So here are the sites that are more left-leaning, more democratic, more liberal. And then on the right side, these are the sites or the publishing companies, media outlets that are leaning more conservative, more right-wing, more Republican. Okay. And again, this just helps us kind of give us a ballpark. All right. Now, this might be a little bit difficult to see, but this is actually incredibly helpful. This left chart right here. If you click media bias chart, all right, it's going to take you to a website where you could search a name of a site. So, for instance, Dr. Wolf, I listen to NPR a lot in the car on my way home or to work if I'm not carpool. So let's type in NPR. And it pops up, NPR. All right, so on this chart, it's right here. And what the heck does that mean, by the way, on this chart? All right, so it's in the green. That looks good. What does that mean? If we looked at this y-axis right here, original fact reporting, complex analysis, these sound like good things. So more reliable. As we go down, less reliable. Selective or incomplete story, contains misleading information, contains inaccurate fabricated info. So we want things that are more to the top of this chart right here. On the x-axis is its political bias. How does it lean? Left, right? Democrat, liberal, right? To the right, conservative, Republican, right? And so they're going to have these biases in terms of kind of pushing those different political agendas. And so it looks like NPR, this is nice. It's fairly credible. It's up here. And in terms of its political bias, it's a little bit to the left, but pretty dang neutral. All right. Let's look at another source, right? Let's look at, for instance, Fox News. All right, Fox News, it's a little bit lower on its credibility right here, right? There are some stuff that is up there on its credibility in terms of like our little dots, right? But overall, the average is right around here. It's definitely a little bit more right-leaning, conservative, and it looks like it's just a little bit low in terms of fact reporting. It looks like they're going to have a little bit more maybe like opinion, a little bit less reliable, all right? Let's look at another one. Pod Save America. All right, this is a podcast, by the way, and it's definitely left leaning, right? And it's a little bit more on like the opinion side right here. So maybe good for getting an opinion, but maybe not the best for getting like all your news facts, things like that. So notice if I take away this the search bar right here, right? You could have bias on the left side. You could have bias on the right side. Okay. And then notice this is about kind of like the pinnacle about how high we get in terms of its reliability. All right. So again, a really helpful source. I would recommend using it for the activity you guys are going to be doing today. Thanks for watching. Stay in school.